The scanner in my left hand was screaming, and I did not understand why. I am Vrakis Doan, Senior War Chief of the Deathworld Coalition, and I have led armies across volcanic plains where the ground itself tried to swallow us whole. I have breathed sulfur-choked air since the day I hatched from my birthstone on Kalor Prime, a world where gravity crushes weak bones into powder, and rivers run with molten silicon. I have never once felt uncertain standing before an enemy, but standing on that observation deck aboard Helix Station, watching the blue-green marble of Earth spin lazily beneath us, I felt something I could not name. The Galactic Senate had begged us to come here. They had sent 14 formal requests over 18 months, each one more desperate than the last. They wanted us to evaluate humanity, to decide if these creatures from a Class 7 Deathworld were a threat worth worrying about, or just another species the Senate could manage with trade agreements and empty smiles. I had laughed when I read the first request. Class 7. My own homeworld is rated Class 12. Gorath's acid ocean planet sits at Class 11. Sylvessa hunts on a Class 10 jungle world, where every vine, every insect, every shadow, carries something that can end your life before you even register the pain. We are the Coalition. We are the 5 deadliest species the galaxy has ever catalogued, and the Senate wanted us to be afraid of a Class 7. So I gathered my delegation and came here to prove them wrong. Gorath stood to my left, his exoskeletal plates gleaming under the station's artificial light. His people swim through acid geysers the way other species swim through water. His outer shell can withstand corrosive compounds that would dissolve most metals, and the scars running across his chest plate came from a territorial war he won by diving into a boiling sulfuric lake and dragging his rival down with him. He was the toughest organic being I had ever met, and he was bored. I could tell because his mandibles kept clicking in that slow, rhythmic pattern that meant he wanted to be somewhere else. Sylvessa stood to my right, perfectly still, the way only a born predator can be still, 6 limbs folded against her lean frame, each one tipped with retractable claws that could punch through ship-grade plating. Her species are ambush hunters. They do not chase, they wait, motionless, for hours, days if necessary, until something wanders close enough. Then they strike once, and it is over. She had told me on the flight here that she expected humans to be soft prey animals who had stumbled into space travel by accident. I had agreed with her. Toric Maul was the quiet one, as always. Silicon-based, radiation-hardened, from a blasted desert world where the sun strips organic molecules apart. He does not speak often, but when he does, every word carries the weight of a species that learned to think in equations because their planet gave them nothing else. He had been studying human data files for the entire journey, and the only thing he said before we docked was, "Their biochemistry is unusual." I did not ask him to elaborate. I should have. Keth completed our group: cryogenic biology, methane ice physiology, from a frozen world so far from its star that the concept of warmth is almost mythological to his people. He moved slowly by our standards, but his mind was sharp, and his patience was infinite. He had survived 3 assassination attempts by simply waiting until his attackers froze to death in his presence. 5 Deathworld leaders, 5 species forged in environments that should have made life impossible. We had come to evaluate humanity, and privately, every one of us had already decided the outcome. Humans were soft. Their world was barely dangerous by our standards. This would be a quick assessment, a polite refusal to the Senate's request for intervention, and then we would go home. The journey from our flagship to the docking port took 11 minutes in the transfer shuttle, and during those 11 minutes, I reviewed the Senate's briefing files one final time. Humanity had made first contact with the broader galactic community just 43 standard years ago. In that time, they had established 17 colony worlds, constructed a deep space station network spanning 2 spiral arms, and developed a fleet of exploration vessels that routinely ventured into uncharted territory that other species refused to enter. The Senate's file noted this expansion rate as concerning, but offered no explanation for how a species from a Class 7 world could achieve it. I had dismissed the concern. Rapid expansion is common among new spacefaring species. It usually slows once they encounter something that frightens them. I intended to be the thing that showed them the galaxy was not as friendly as they assumed. Our human liaison met us at the docking port. Commander Elara Voss. She was smaller than I expected, Humans are bipedal, which I knew, but seeing it in person was different. 2 arms, 2 legs, no claws, no exoskeletal plates, no venom glands, no radiation shielding, just smooth skin stretched over fragile bones, with 2 forward-facing eyes that marked them as predators in the most basic biological sense, but gave no indication of what kind of predators they actually were. "Welcome aboard Helix Station," she said, and her voice was steady and warm in a way that made Sylvessa's claws twitch. "Predators recognize confidence. I understand you are here to observe daily human life and make your assessment for the Senate." "We are," I said. "Show us your military operations, your weapons testing, your combat training facilities." She smiled, and something about that smile made the base of my spine tighten. "We will get to all of that, War Chief, but first, I would like to show you something more important." She led us through the station's corridors, and I cataloged every detail with a soldier's eye. The air was climate-controlled, steady temperature, filtered and recycled. The lighting was soft, calibrated to mimic what humans call sunlight. The walls were smooth, the floors cushioned. Everywhere I looked, I saw comfort, softness, a species that had built its habitat to eliminate every trace of hardship. We passed a recreation area where human children were running at full speed across an open floor, chasing each other in what appeared to be some kind of competitive pursuit game. Their feet struck the ground with surprising force for such small creatures, and their laughter echoed off the walls with a sharpness that made Sylvessa's ears flatten. They collided with each other at velocity, tumbled, rolled, stood up without checking for injuries, and resumed running. No protective equipment, no supervision beyond a single adult sitting in the corner reading a data pad. Their young were slamming into each other at speeds that would crack Keth's outer frost layer, and the attending adult was not even watching. Gorath clicked his mandibles dismissively. "They have removed all challenge from their environment," he muttered in Coalition Standard, assuming the human could not understand. "This is a nursery, not a station." Sylvessa's eyes tracked every human we passed, measuring them the way she measured prey. Small, slow, no natural armor. I count 0 threat indicators. Even Torek Mal seemed unimpressed, though he said nothing. His crystalline eyes moved constantly, scanning, calculating, filing away data, but his posture remained relaxed. I felt my confidence solidify. The Senate had wasted our time. Then Commander Voss pushed open a wide set of double doors, and we stepped into what she called the mess hall. It was enormous, a sprawling open space filled with tables and chairs and the noise of hundreds of humans eating, talking, laughing. The smell hit me first, a complex wall of chemical signatures that my scanner immediately began cataloging, but I ignored it. The sight is what stopped me. It was not a military facility. It was not a combat training ground. It was not even a strategic briefing room. It was a cafeteria, a place where humans ate food. "Commander," I said, keeping the irritation from my voice with effort, "we traveled across 3 star systems to conduct a threat assessment. You have brought us to watch your people eat." "Yes," she said simply. "This is an insult." "It is not." She turned to face all 5 of us, and her expression had shifted into something I could not read. Not fear, not hostility. Something patient and knowing, like a teacher waiting for a student to solve a problem they do not yet understand. "You came here to measure us, to decide if we are dangerous. I could show you our weapons, our warships, our training programs, but none of that would tell you what you actually need to know." She pointed toward the far side of the mess hall, where a separate section held smaller tables. Children, human offspring, seated in clusters, eating from trays loaded with food items I did not recognize. My scanner was pinging constantly now, flagging compound after compound, but I had muted the audio alerts because they were becoming distracting. "You see that girl?" Ilara said, pointing to one table where a single child sat with a tray piled higher than those around her. She looked young, even by human standards. Small frame, dark hair pulled back from her face. She was arranging her food with the casual focus of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. "Her name is Lily. She is 12 years old. She is the daughter of our station's chief botanist, and she has been eating lunch on this station every day for the past 4 years." I stared at the child. "What is the relevance?" Ilara's smile returned, and this time, I recognized the expression. It was the look Sylvessa wore just before a hunt. Quiet. Certain. Patient. "Watch her," Ilara said. "Watch everything she does. Then we will talk." The girl looked up from her tray, noticed 5 alien warlords staring at her from across the cafeteria, and waved. She waved at us with a small hand and a bright smile, the way you might greet a neighbor you see every morning. Then she turned back to her lunch and peeled the wrapping off her first item. My scanner unmuted itself. The alert was priority level red. I looked down at the device, and for the first time in my career as a war chief, I did not understand the readings. The girl picked up a sealed canister, pressed a tab on its surface, and a sharp hissing sound cut through the ambient noise. I watched her bring it to her mouth and drink. My scanner had already broken down the contents. Carbonated water saturated with dissolved carbonic acid, phosphoric acid at concentrations that would strip calcium from bone in most silicon-based species, refined sucrose at levels my device classified as a metabolic toxin, artificial coloring compounds flagged as potential carcinogens in 37 known species. She drank it the way I drink water on my homeworld, without thought, without hesitation, as if it were the most natural thing in the universe. Keth leaned toward me. His cryogenic body crackled faintly as he moved, ice crystals shifting along his joints. "Vrakis, what is she consuming?" "Acid," I said. "She is drinking acid." "Voluntarily?" I looked at Ilara. "Is the child being punished?" Ilara laughed. Not a mocking laugh. A genuine laugh, as if I had said something endearing. "That is a soda, War Chief. It is a treat. Children beg their parents for it." Keth's crystalline eyes widened. On his world, acid is what his people use to dissolve enemy fortifications. Here, children drank it for pleasure. The girl set down her canister and picked up the main item on her tray. It was layered, a flatbread envelope holding multiple substances compressed together. She opened her mouth and bit into it, and my scanner fired off a cascade of alerts so dense that the display flickered, trying to render them all. I read the breakdown, and my grip tightened around the scanner's casing hard enough to crack it. The primary layer was muscle tissue, animal muscle tissue, sliced from the body of a large terrestrial herbivore, chemically processed and cured with sodium nitrite, a compound my scanner classified as a cellular-level toxin in its pure form. Layered on top of the meat was a substance the scanner identified as a fermented bacterial colony, a semi-solid mass of living microorganisms that humans had cultivated, shaped, and sliced into thin sheets. They called it cheese. It was alive. She was eating living bacteria by the billions, and chewing them between her teeth like they were nothing. Beneath the bacterial colony sat a layer of plant matter containing mild alkaloid compounds, chemicals that in concentrated form would disrupt neural function in most carbon-based species. And binding it all together was a spread made from the extracted fat of yet another animal, churned and solidified into a paste. Predator kill, toxin cure, living bacterial culture, neurochemical plant matter, animal fat. One bite. She took it all in one bite, and she chewed with her eyes half closed in what I could only interpret as satisfaction. Her jaw muscles worked with an efficiency that Torek Mal later told me generates enough force per square centimeter to crush certain types of bone. She was a 12-year-old predator consuming a combination of toxins and biological hazards that would require a 5-stage decontamination protocol on Gorath's homeworld, and she was doing it with the relaxed contentment of someone who had not a single concern in the universe beyond whether her meal tasted good enough. I glanced at my delegation. Sylvessa had stopped breathing. I noticed because the faint whistle of air through her secondary gills went silent. She was standing perfectly still the way she does before a kill strike, but her claws were retracted. She was not preparing to attack. She was preparing to run. "That is a sandwich," Ilara said calmly from beside us. "Ham and cheese. It is one of the simpler things we eat." "Simpler," she said, "simpler." Gorath's exoskeletal plates had locked into defensive configuration. I had never seen him do that outside of combat. His mandibles were frozen mid-click, and his compound eyes were locked on the girl with an intensity I had only ever seen him direct at something he perceived as a genuine threat. The girl reached into a small bag beside her tray and produced a bottle. She shook it over her food, and a red powder cascaded out, dusting the surface of her meal. The color was aggressive. Even from across the room, my scanner caught the chemical signature and immediately reclassified the alert level. Capsaicin, a concentrated neurotoxic compound that triggers severe pain responses in the mucous membranes of nearly every carbon-based species in the Galactic Registry. On 6 Coalition homeworlds, it is classified as a chemical irritant weapon. Possession of concentrated capsaicin on Gorath's world is a criminal offense equivalent to carrying a biological weapon. The girl shook it onto her food like it was decoration. She took another bite, chewed thoughtfully, and added more. Gorath made a sound I had never heard from him before, a low, involuntary clicking deep in his throat, a fear response that his species had not triggered in evolutionary memory. His acid-resistant exoplates, the ones that had survived direct immersion in boiling sulfuric lakes, contracted tight against his body. He was afraid. The toughest organic being I had ever met was afraid of a 12-year-old girl eating her lunch. I turned to Ilara. My voice was steady, but the effort it took to keep it that way was more than I had spent in any battle. What else is she going to eat? Ilara glanced at the tray. She has fruit for after. And dessert. Her mother always packs dessert. The girl picked up a small red fruit, round and smooth and ordinary looking. She bit into it with a clean, crisp sound, and juice ran down her chin. She wiped it with the back of her hand and kept chewing, seeds and all. My scanner identified the seeds and flagged them with the highest alert classification it had. Amygdalin, a compound that converts to hydrogen cyanide during metabolic processing. Hydrogen cyanide, one of the most lethal chemical agents known to galactic science. She was eating it. She was chewing the seeds and swallowing them, and her body was going to convert them into cyanide, and she was going to survive. She was going to survive because her species had evolved to neutralize it. Torek Mal's hand closed around my forearm. His silicon fingers were strong enough to crush stone, and I felt the pressure through my dense bone structure. His voice, usually so measured and calm, came out in a whisper that trembled at the edges. What is she? I did not have an answer. Ilara stood beside us, with her hands clasped behind her back, watching our faces with that same patient, knowing expression. She did not explain. She did not reassure. She simply let us watch. The girl finished her fruit, tossed the core into a waste receptacle with casual accuracy, and reached for her dessert. I wanted to tell my delegation that we were overreacting, that she was just a child, that this was just food, that we were the leaders of the 5 deadliest species in the galaxy, and we would not be shaken by a 12-year-old's lunch tray. But the data on my scanner was undeniable, and the cold feeling spreading through my chest had nothing to do with the station's temperature. The girl unwrapped a small square of something brown and smooth. She broke it into pieces with her fingers, and I watched her place one piece into her mouth with the ease of someone who has done this every day of her life. My scanner identified the compound before she finished chewing, and when the results came through, I felt the floor shift beneath my feet. Theobromine, a methylxanthine alkaloid that is acutely toxic to dozens of cataloged species. Fatal dosage thresholds so low that even trace contamination requires hazardous material protocols on 14 Coalition worlds. She was eating it. She was breaking it into pieces. And she was not just eating it. She was walking to the next table, to a group of 3 other children, and she was handing them pieces. She was distributing a lethal toxin to other children, as a gift, as a social bonding gesture. The children took the pieces and thanked her, and they all ate together, laughing about something I could not hear, consuming enough theobromine to theoretically compromise the cardiac systems of every non-human species in the cafeteria. I watched one of the children dip her piece of chocolate into the remains of a carbonated drink before eating it, combining 2 hazardous substances into a single bite. Another child produced a small container of something white and creamy, poured it over his chocolate, and ate the combination with a spoon. My scanner identified the white substance as a dairy-based emulsion containing lactose, a sugar compound that a significant percentage of adult humans cannot metabolize properly. Even within their own species, certain foods cause digestive distress, and yet they continue eating them. They eat things that their own bodies reject, not because they must, but because they enjoy the taste enough to accept the consequences. That is chocolate, Elara said. A common treat. Most human children eat it daily. Daily? I looked at my delegation. 5 war chief class leaders from the most dangerous planets the galaxy has ever classified. Gorath, whose exoplates were still locked in full defensive configuration. Sylvessa, who had not taken a breath in over a minute. Torek Mal, whose grip on my arm was leaving pressure fractures in my bone. Keth, whose cryogenic field had dropped 3 degrees, an involuntary stress response his species had not exhibited since their last ice age. And me, Vrakis Don, war chief of Kalor Prime, standing in a cafeteria, watching a child eat chocolate, and feeling something I had never felt on any battlefield, in any war, against any enemy. I felt outmatched. Elara watched us with that steady, patient gaze, and I understood now what the expression meant. It was not the look of a predator before a hunt. It was the look of someone who already knows how the conversation is going to end, and is simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. "Would you like to continue the observation?" she asked. "Or shall we move to the military facilities now?" I heard my own voice respond before I had consciously decided to speak. "What does your military eat?" The smile that crossed Elara's face was the most unsettling thing I had seen since we arrived. "And I include the cyanide fruit." "More," she said. "They eat more." I stepped away from the observation rail and turned to face my delegation. They were looking at me the way soldiers look at a commander when the battle plan has collapsed, when the enemy is not what they expected, when everything they prepared for is irrelevant. "Private consultation," I said, "now." We moved to the far corner of the cafeteria. Sylvessa finally took a breath, a long, shuddering intake that rattled through her gill slits. Gorath's plates unlocked one by one, with sharp clicking sounds, like bolts retracting on a pressure door. Keth's temperature began stabilizing, but his eyes kept darting back to the table, where the children were still eating chocolate and laughing. "Tell me I am overreacting," I said. Nobody spoke. "Tell me that what we just witnessed has a rational explanation that does not change our assessment of this species." Torek Mal released my arm. The pressure marks were deep. He looked at his own hand as if surprised by what he had done, then looked back at me, with those crystalline eyes that usually held nothing but cold calculation. "I cannot tell you that, Vrakis," he said, "because every reading I have taken in the last 12 minutes has confirmed what the Galactic Senate tried to warn us about. Their biochemistry is not unusual, it is impossible, and the child is proof." "She is proof of what?" He turned to look at the girl, at Lily, who had finished her chocolate and was now collecting her tray with the lazy efficiency of a child who wanted to get back to whatever she had been doing before lunch, interrupted her. "She is proof that this species did not survive their Deathworld," Torek Mal said quietly. "They consumed it." I looked at the girl one more time. She stacked her tray, tossed her napkin into the waste bin, and walked toward the exit, with the careless stride of someone whose greatest concern in the universe was whether she had enough time before her next class. She passed within 3 meters of our group on her way out. She glanced up at us, smiled the same bright smile she had given us at the beginning, and said, "The chocolate here is really good. You should try some." Then she walked away, humming softly to herself, and disappeared through the cafeteria doors. 5 Deathworld leaders stood in her wake, and not one of us moved. I looked down at my scanner. The last alert was still blinking on the display, a compound analysis summary of everything the girl had consumed in the span of 20 minutes. Acid, cellular toxins, living bacterial colonies, neurochemical alkaloids, cyanide precursors, lethal methylxanthines, each one flagged red. Each one classified as hazardous, restricted, or outright banned on at least one coalition homeworld. And she had called it lunch. I muted the scanner, slid it back into my belt, and made a decision that went against every instinct I had built over 3 decades of warfare. "We are going to see their military facilities," I told my delegation, "and we are going to pay very close attention. Because if their children ate like this, I was no longer certain I wanted to know what their soldiers were capable of. But I was absolutely certain I needed to find out." Elara was waiting for us by the cafeteria exit. She had that same expression, patient, knowing, completely at ease, and she led us deeper into the station without saying a word. The silence that followed us through those corridors was different from the silence of 5 Deathworld leaders who were bored. This was the silence of 5 Deathworld leaders who were recalculating everything. And we were only getting started. I told myself that what happened in the cafeteria was an anomaly, a quirk of human biochemistry that looked alarming on a scanner, but meant nothing in the broader strategic picture. I told myself this as Alara led us through the station's lower levels, past research labs and hydroponics bays and recreation areas where humans lounged in zero-gravity hammocks reading data pads. I told myself this because I am a war chief, and war chiefs do not let their strategies collapse because a child ate a piece of chocolate. But Torek Mall had accessed the station's open cultural database during our walk, and he was reading quietly on his personal display, and the color was draining from his crystalline face in a way I had never seen before. Silicon-based species do not go pale the way carbon-based ones do. When a being like Torek Mall loses color, it means his molecular lattice is contracting at a structural level. It means his body is physically preparing for a threat his mind has already identified. "Vrakas," he said, matching my stride, keeping his voice below the hearing range of our human escort. "I need to share something with you. Walk and talk. Humans ferment their food deliberately." He said this the way a demolitions expert might say there is a bomb under our feet. They take organic material, introduce bacterial cultures, and allow controlled decomposition to occur. Then they eat the result. They call it preservation, but the process produces ethanol, acetic acid, and a range of biological compounds that would require hazmat containment on my homeworld. We saw the bacterial colony on the child's food, the cheese. Cheese is the beginning. Their database lists hundreds of fermented products. Some are partially decomposed animal secretions. Some are plant matter left to rot in controlled environments for months. Some are grain-based liquids saturated with ethanol, a solvent and cellular toxin, which they consume recreationally. At social gatherings, sometimes competitively. I stopped walking. Competitively? They hold organized events, where individuals consume ethanol in increasing quantities to determine who can ingest the most before their neurological function degrades. This is considered entertainment. Gorath had been listening. His mandibles began clicking in a pattern I recognized as threat assessment, the same rhythm he used when mapping enemy positions before an assault. A solvent. They drink a solvent for entertainment. The ethanol is not the most concerning finding. Torek Mall scrolled through data on his display, and his lattice contracted another fraction, the capsaicin compound the child applied to her food. I traced its agricultural history. Humans have been cultivating the plant that produces it for over 7,000 of their years. During that period, they selectively bred successive generations to produce higher and higher concentrations of capsaicin. The original plant was mildly irritating. The current variants produce concentrations that exceed the threshold for chemical weapon classification on 11 coalition worlds. They bred a plant to be more toxic, Sylvessa said flatly. She had been silent since the cafeteria, processing, the way her species does before making a kill decision. On purpose, over thousands of years. Because the existing levels were not strong enough for their preferences. I let that sink in. A species that had taken a naturally occurring chemical irritant, one that would qualify as a weapon on our most hardened worlds, and spent millennia making it stronger because they wanted their food to burn more when they ate it. Alara glanced back at us. "Everything all right?" "Fine," I said. "Continue the tour." She led us around a corner and stopped at a reinforced door marked with symbols I did not recognize. "This is our crew galley," she said. "The main kitchen where meals are prepared for station personnel. I thought you might want to see how the food is made." She pushed the door open, and the wall of heat and chemical signatures that rolled out hit me like a shockwave from a volcanic vent. My scanner, which I had unmuted against my better judgment, immediately began cataloging the airborne compounds. Smoke particulates from organic combustion. Aerosolized capsaicin at concentrations that would trigger evacuation protocols on 4 coalition stations. Maillard reaction byproducts. Acrolein, carbon monoxide traces. The humans in this room were cooking inside a cloud of compounds that, on any of our homeworlds would constitute an environmental hazard. None of them were wearing protective equipment. Not a single mask, not a single filtration unit, not a single barrier between their exposed skin and the airborne chemical cocktail filling the room. There were 8 humans working in this kitchen, and every one of them was breathing the contaminated air without hesitation, their lungs processing compounds that would send Toric Mal's atmospheric regulators into emergency shutdown. One of them was singing, actually singing, producing rhythmic vocalizations of apparent pleasure, while standing directly above a pan that was releasing aerosolized animal fat and carbon particles at concentrations my scanner flagged as a respiratory threat. The kitchen was run by a large human male who introduced himself as Davi. He was broad across the shoulders, thick through the arms, and he smiled with the easy warmth of someone who had never once considered that his workplace was dangerous. He shook my hand, and his grip was firm without being aggressive, the calibrated strength of a species that knows exactly how much force it can apply and chooses to moderate it. That thought unsettled me more than the scanner readings. "Welcome to my kitchen," he said. "Commander Voss said you wanted to understand human food. Best way to do that is right here." He gestured to a long counter, where several items were being prepared. Meats sizzling on heated metal surfaces, vegetables being sliced with edged tools that Sylvesa's eyes locked onto with professional interest, and liquids bubbling in pressurized containers over open flame. Open flame. They were cooking with controlled fire inside a pressurized space station. The engineering confidence required to even consider that was staggering, but they treated it as unremarkable. Davi led us along the counter, explaining each station like a battlefield commander walking us through a tactical display. "This here is our grill station. We sear meat at high temperatures to create a crust. Locks in flavor." He flipped a thick slab of animal tissue with a practiced motion, and the sizzle of rendered fat hitting superheated metal sent a plume of smoke into the ventilation system. I checked my scanner. The surface temperature of that grill was high enough to cause second-degree thermal damage to every species in my delegation, except Toric Mal, whose silicon structure could theoretically withstand it. The human was standing over it in short sleeves, flipping meat with his bare hands and a thin metal tool, humming to himself. "Over here is our fermentation project," Davi continued, leading us to a section of the kitchen where sealed containers lined a temperature-controlled shelf. He opened one, and the smell that emerged made Keth take a full step backward. Kimchi. It is a traditional food from a region on Earth called Korea. Vegetables packed in salt and chili paste, left to ferment for weeks. The beneficial bacteria break down the plant fibers and create lactic acid, which gives it that sour kick. He reached in with his bare hand, pulled out a piece of glistening, pungent plant matter crawling with active bacterial cultures, and ate it. Just like that. No preparation, no decontamination. He reached into a container of living microorganisms and put them directly into his mouth, and chewed with obvious pleasure. Gorath's exoplates locked again. On his world, an open container of active bacterial cultures would trigger a biological containment response. Specialized units in sealed armor would be dispatched to isolate the site. Here, a man in a casual uniform was eating them as a mid-shift snack. "This is sauerkraut?" Davi said, opening another container. "Same principle. Cabbage fermented in its own brine, and this is yogurt, fermented animal milk. We eat this for breakfast, usually with fruit and granola. Fermented animal milk." They were taking the biological secretions of another species, introducing bacterial cultures, allowing controlled decomposition, and consuming the result as a morning ritual. My delegation stood in a semicircle around the fermentation shelf, like soldiers surrounding an unexploded ordnance, and Davi talked about it the way Keth might talk about adjusting the temperature in his sleeping chamber. "You mentioned the spice the girl was using," Elara said to me, having apparently overheard our earlier conversation despite my precautions. "Humans have better hearing than their fragile appearance suggests. Davi, why do you not show them your collection?" Davi's face lit up with genuine excitement, the kind of enthusiasm I had only ever seen in soldiers showing off a new weapon system. He led us to the back of the kitchen, where a shelf mounted on the wall held 24 bottles of varying sizes, each containing a liquid or paste in shades of red, orange, and deep brown. "My hot sauce collection," he said proudly. Been building this for years. Started when I was a kid on the Proxima colony. We used to have pepper eating competitions every harvest season. Children participated in these competitions? Torek Mal asked, his voice carrying a note I had never heard from him before. Dread. Oh yeah, absolutely. My little sister could handle a Carolina Reaper by the time she was 9. Cried the first time, but she went back for more the next day. That is just how we are. My scanner was analyzing the bottles on the shelf. The readings came in sequentially, and each one was worse than the last. The first few bottles contained capsaicin concentrations that exceeded standard coalition chemical weapon classifications. The middle range contained concentrated extracts that my scanner could not properly categorize because they exceeded maximum classification thresholds. The final bottles, the ones Davi reached for with a reverent expression, contained pure capsaicin extracts with Scoville ratings so high that my scanner returned an error message I had never seen before. Classification exceeded, no equivalent index exists. Davi pulled the cap off one of these bottles and held it under his nose, breathing deeply. This one right here is my favorite. Ghost pepper and scorpion pepper blend with a little mango for sweetness. I put it on everything. Eggs, rice, meat, soup, even ice cream once, just to see. You put a substance with no equivalent toxicity classification on frozen dessert, Keth said slowly, to see what would happen. Yeah, Davi grinned. It was actually pretty good. Sylvessa moved to my side. She did it smoothly, without drawing attention, the way she moves when she is repositioning for a retreat. Her voice was barely audible. Vrakis. His children ate this. Their young competed to consume this. You understand what that means. I understood. On Sylvessa's world, the most dangerous predators are identified by what they can eat. The apex hunter is the one whose biology can neutralize the most lethal compounds in its environment. By that metric, human children, 9-year-old human children, were already more chemically resilient than Sylvessa's most feared predators. Davi had moved on to another section of the kitchen. He held up a sealed package with military markings and tore it open with a casual motion. This is an MRE. Meal, ready to eat. Standard military field ration. When our soldiers are deployed and cannot access a proper kitchen, this is what they eat. He pulled out a flat pouch and dropped it into a plastic sleeve, then added water. Within seconds, the sleeve began generating heat, and steam rose from the opening. My scanner identified the reaction immediately, an exothermic chemical process using finely powdered iron, magnesium, and sodium chloride. The temperature inside the heating sleeve spiked to levels that Keth classified as a thermal weapon threshold. That reaction, Keth said carefully, is chemically adjacent to the thermal charges my people use in demolition work. Davi looked at the heating sleeve, then back at Keth, then shrugged. Yeah, it gets pretty hot. You have to be careful not to touch the sleeve directly. Burns are no fun. He used demolition-adjacent chemistry to warm his lunch. He acknowledged it could burn him. He continued using it. This was the military's standard approach to feeding soldiers in the field, and the most remarkable thing about it was how completely unremarkable every human in the room found it. The food inside the MRE was dense and compact. My scanner identified preservation compounds with stability ratings that exceeded the operational lifespan of some coalition governments. This food had been engineered to remain edible for years, packed with caloric density levels that would sustain a human through extreme physical exertion, and sealed in packaging that could survive conditions ranging from vacuum to submersion to high-impact kinetic events. They had built food that was tougher than most species. Davi continued talking while assembling the MRE with practiced efficiency. The thing about field rations is that soldiers eat them in conditions that would make most cooks cry. Rain, mud, sand, extreme heat, extreme cold. I served on a polar outpost where the outside temperature dropped low enough to freeze fuel lines, and guys would sit in a dugout eating these things, with their gloves on, holding the heating pack against their chest for warmth between bites. One sergeant I knew used to eat his MRE standing in waist-deep water during flood zone operations because he said sitting down was a waste of time. He ate in waist-deep water, Keth repeated. Your species voluntarily submerges in liquid while eating. When you are hungry enough, you eat wherever you are. Davy shrugged, as if this were the most obvious statement in the universe. The human body does not care about comfort. It cares about calories. Give a soldier enough calories and enough motivation, and there is no environment they will refuse to eat in. What does the average soldier add to this meal? Torek Mal asked. He already knew the answer. I could tell by the way he asked the question, with the precise, controlled tone of a scientist, confirming a hypothesis he desperately hopes is wrong. Davy reached into a cabinet and pulled out a small bottle of red liquid. Hot sauce! Every soldier I have ever served with carries their own bottle. Some units have signature blends. It is kind of a tradition. A tradition, Torek Mal repeated. Yeah, you have not really served until you have watched someone put habanero sauce on a field ration at 3 in the morning in a foxhole and call it the best meal they have ever had. Davy laughed. Soldiers are different, man. They will eat anything. I looked at my delegation. Gorath had not unlocked his exoplate since we entered the kitchen. Sylvessa was standing near the exit, her body angled toward the door in a posture I recognized from decades of working alongside her. It was her extraction posture, the way she positioned herself when she had determined that the current environment exceeded acceptable threat parameters. Torek Mal was still reading data on his display, and his molecular lattice had contracted so far that hairline fractures were visible along his forearms. Keth had dropped another 2 degrees and was leaving frost patterns on the floor where he stood, and Davi was showing us hot sauce bottles with the enthusiasm of a collector showing off rare artifacts, completely oblivious to the fact that 5 of the galaxy's most dangerous beings were standing in his kitchen, reassessing the fundamental nature of his entire species. I pulled Sylvessa aside, while Davi demonstrated how to properly shake a fermented fish sauce without breaking the seal. Assessment, I said. Give it to me straight. She looked at me with her hunting eyes, the wide, dark pupils that could track prey across 3 kilometers of dense jungle, and said, I hunt apex predators on my homeworld. I track them, I ambush them, I take them barehanded. It is what my species does. It is what we evolved to do. She paused. But we do not eat poison for recreation, Vracus. We do not breed our food to be more lethal over generations. We do not feed chemical weapons to our children as treats, and then laugh about it. What are you saying? I am saying that I am an apex predator, and that child in the cafeteria would terrify every hunter on my homeworld, not because she is physically dangerous, because she is biologically impossible. Her species has achieved a level of chemical resistance that my people would classify as an evolutionary weapon, and they do not even know it. They think it is normal. They think cyanide fruit and neurotoxin spices and ethanol solvents are just part of a balanced diet. She straightened. You asked for my assessment. Here it is. We are not the apex predators in this room, Vracus. We have not been since we walked through those cafeteria doors. I thought about everything I had seen. The girl drinking acid. The capsaicin she sprinkled on her food like it was decoration. The cheese made of living bacteria. The chocolate she shared with her friends, each piece carrying enough theobromine to compromise cardiac function in species far tougher than most of the galaxy. The cook who ate fermented vegetables from an open jar with his bare hands, and then demonstrated a hot sauce collection that exceeded maximum toxicity classifications, the MRE, heated by controlled demolition chemistry. The soldiers who carry chemical weapons as condiments and consider it tradition. Each piece was alarming on its own. Together, they formed a picture that was unlike anything I had encountered in 30 years of evaluating species across the galaxy. This was not a strong species. This was not a tough species. This was a species that had fought a war against its own planet's biochemistry, and won so completely that the weapons became snacks. The battlefield became a kitchen. The survival strategies became cultural traditions, passed from parent to child without a second thought. I wanted to argue with her. I wanted to remind her that we had conquered worlds, that our combined military force could glass a planet, that we were the coalition, and we feared nothing. But I looked at Davi, who was now offering Gorath a taste of kimchi, with the casual generosity of someone sharing a snack, and I watched the most physically resilient being in my delegation take a half step backward from a man holding fermented vegetables, and I knew Sylvessa was right. I turned back to Ilara. She had been watching us the entire time, and her expression had not changed. Patient. Knowing. The expression of someone who has already calculated the outcome and is simply waiting for reality to confirm it. "Commander Voss," I said. "The girl in the cafeteria. Lily. She ate cyanide-producing fruit, neurotoxic spice, living bacterial cultures, and a methylxanthine compound that is lethal to dozens of species. She ate all of this in 20 minutes and then offered us some. What I need to understand is whether this is exceptional or typical." "Typical," Lara said. "That was a light lunch. Her mother usually packs more." Torek Mal's display cracked along one edge. He had been holding it too tightly. I asked the question that I knew would either restore my confidence or destroy it entirely. "What does she eat for dinner?" Alara considered this. "Lily is fond of sushi, which is raw fish served with wasabi, a root compound that causes acute sinus inflammation and is used as a topical irritant in some medical applications. She also likes curry, which is a spice blend containing multiple capsaicinoid compounds, as curcumin, which interferes with cellular signaling pathways, and various alkaloids. Her favorite dessert is something called a sundae, which combines dairy-based frozen emulsion with chocolate, caramelized sugar, and crushed tree nuts that contain enough allergenic proteins to trigger anaphylaxis in certain human subpopulations." "Wait," Gorath interrupted. His voice was strained. "Some of these compounds are lethal to their own kind?" "Yes, approximately 8% of humans have allergic reactions to specific food compounds that other humans consume without issue. The same species, the same biology, and some of them can eat a substance that would end another of their kind. They manage this by reading labels." "By reading labels," Gorath repeated. "Correct. The information is printed on the packaging. They check it, determine whether the contents will damage them specifically, and proceed accordingly. It is considered a minor inconvenience." Alara paused, then added something that made Torek Mal's display crack a second time. "I should mention that some humans with severe allergies carry emergency medical injectors on their person at all times. Devices loaded with epinephrine, a hormone that counteracts the allergic response. These individuals know that a single bite of the wrong food could trigger a cascade of physiological failures, and their response is not to avoid all food environments. Their response is to carry a counteragent and continue eating wherever they please. Some of them even taste the dangerous food deliberately, in controlled medical settings, to build tolerance over time. They expose themselves to compounds that could end them," Torek Mal said, "to build resistance. Yes, we call it immunotherapy. The same principle again, woven into every layer of their existence. Expose, survive, adapt. It was not a strategy they had chosen. It was who they were." Gorath looked at me. Gorath, who had survived acid geysers and territorial wars and things that would have ended any other species in the coalition, looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face. It was respect. Not for me. For them. I turned back to Alara and asked the question that had been forming in my mind since the moment the girl bit into that cyanide fruit. The question that I already knew the answer to, but needed to hear spoken aloud so that it would become real and force me to act on it. "Commander, you said you would show us your military facilities after this, but that is not why you brought us to the cafeteria first, is it?" Her expression shifted. The patience remained, but something harder appeared beneath it. Something I recognized because I had seen it in the mirror every day of my command. Authority. The quiet, unshakable kind that does not need to announce itself. "No," she said. "I brought you here first because your military is the strongest thing about your species. Your weapons, your armor, your training, those are the peak of what your worlds have produced. But our military is not the strongest thing about us. Our biology is. And I wanted you to understand that before you saw anything else. Because once you understand what a 12-year-old girl can eat for lunch on a Tuesday, you will understand why the Galactic Senate sent 14 requests for your assessment, instead of simply opposing us themselves." The kitchen was quiet. Davi had stopped talking. Even the sizzle of the grill seemed to fade. I looked at my delegation, 5 Deathworld leaders, 5 species forged in conditions that should have made life impossible. And for the first time in our collective history, every single one of us was looking at a human and seeing something we had never encountered before. Not a predator, not a warrior, not a weapon. Something worse. An omnivore with no biological ceiling. A species that looked at every poison, every toxin, every lethal compound their world could produce and said, "How does that taste?" Sylvessa was right. We were not the apex predators in this room, and we had not even seen the military yet. I excused my delegation from the kitchen with as much composure as I could maintain, which was less than I would have liked, but more than my people deserved, given what we had just witnessed. Ilara led us to a conference room on the station's upper level, and I requested 30 minutes for private deliberation. She granted it with that same patient smile and left us alone. The moment the door sealed, Keth spoke. He rarely spoke first. His species values observation over contribution, and in 3 years of coalition leadership, I could count on one hand the number of times he had opened a discussion before the rest of us. So when his voice filled the room, low and crackling with frost, every one of us listened. "I have been running probability models since the cafeteria," he said. "Specifically, I have been modeling what happens to a species when its baseline biochemistry can neutralize the compounds we just observed. Capsaicin, ethanol, cyanide precursors, theobromine, acetic acid, phosphoric acid. Each of these substances interacts with biological systems at the cellular level. To neutralize them, the organism's cells must possess repair mechanisms, filtration processes, and toxin management pathways that operate continuously and at a scale that none of our species have achieved." "Meaning what?" Gorath asked. His exoplates were still partially locked, and he kept glancing at the sealed door as if he expected Davi to walk through it carrying kimchi. "Meaning their cellular repair rate is extraordinary. If a human body can process cyanide, filter ethanol, neutralize capsaicin, and metabolize theobromine simultaneously without significant impairment, then the underlying mechanisms responsible for that processing are operating at a level that has profound implications for their resilience in other areas." Torek Mal set down his cracked display. "He is talking about healing, Gorath. If their cells can manage chemical threats at that level, their ability to recover from physical damage is likely proportional." "How proportional?" Torek Mal pulled up data on a secondary device. "Humans can regenerate skin tissue in days. They can regrow bone in weeks. Their immune system actively hunts and destroys foreign biological agents, using specialized cells that function as an internal military force. They have a compound in their blood called white blood cells that seek out, identify, and eliminate threats, and their body produces these continuously. They also generate antibodies, targeted chemical weapons designed to neutralize specific invaders, and their system remembers every threat it has ever encountered, so it can respond faster the next time." "Their blood is an army," Sylvessa said quietly. "Their blood is a self-improving army, one that learns from every engagement and adapts its tactics accordingly. No coalition species has an equivalent system at this level of sophistication." He paused and pulled up another data set. "There is more. Their species regularly survives injuries that would be fatal to any coalition member. Bone fractures that heal stronger than the original structure. Massive tissue damage that triggers accelerated regeneration cycles. I found records of individual humans surviving the loss of entire limbs and continuing to function, even returning to military duty with prosthetic replacements. Their medical literature contains documented cases of humans surviving wounds that destroyed significant portions of their internal organs, only to recover and resume normal activity within months." "They survive organ damage?" Gorath asked, and his voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. "They replace organs from donors, from other humans who no longer need them. They take functioning biological components from one body and install them in another, and the recipient's immune system, after initial resistance, accepts the foreign tissue and integrates it. They call it transplantation, and they have been doing it for over a century." The room was silent for a long moment. Gorath's mandibles clicked once. Slowly, the way they do when he is processing something that does not fit into his existing framework. "Then the food is not the weapon," he said. "The food is the evidence. It is proof that their biology operates at a level we did not account for." "Correct," Torek Mal said. The child was not demonstrating human dietary habits. She was demonstrating human cellular capability, and she did not even know it. Every bite she took was evidence of a biological system, so resilient that what we classify as hazardous material, her body classifies as nutrition. I stood by the window, looking out at the blue-green planet below. Earth, Class 7 Deathworld. Except it was not Class 7. I knew that now. The classification system measured environmental danger, atmospheric toxicity, gravitational stress, predator density, geological instability. It measured the world. It did not measure what the world produced. Earth had produced a species that ate its own planet's weapons for breakfast, and called them comfort food. The classification system had never accounted for that, because no one had ever imagined it was possible. "There is more," Keth said. "I accessed their historical database during our tour. Humans have a medical practice called vaccination. They take weakened or inactive versions of diseases, pathogens that would otherwise cause severe illness or death, and they deliberately inject them into their own bodies, including their children, sometimes within days of birth." Sylvesa's claws extended involuntarily. They infect their young, with diseases. With controlled versions of diseases. The purpose is to provoke their immune system into producing antibodies without causing full illness. The result is that the individual becomes resistant to the actual pathogen. They have used this technique to eliminate entire diseases from their species. Plagues that once ended millions of them are now historical footnotes because they looked at the thing that was ending them and decided to put it inside themselves on purpose. Gorath stood up from his seat and walked to the window. He placed one massive hand against the transparent surface and stared at the planet below. "On my world," he said slowly, "when a plague strikes, we quarantine. We isolate the infected, and we wait for the disease to burn itself out. And we count our losses afterward. We have done this for 10,000 generations." He turned back to face us. These creatures looked at a plague and instead of hiding from it, they cut it apart, weakened it, and injected it into their newborns. They fed disease to their babies to make them stronger. And it worked. It did more than work, Keth continued. Some of their most devastating historical plagues no longer exist, not suppressed, not contained. Eliminated, erased from biological existence. They did not just survive those diseases. They hunted them to extinction using their own immune systems as weapons. "That is the same pattern," I said, and my voice sounded distant to my own ears. "The same pattern as the food. They take what should destroy them, and they incorporate it. Capsaicin, cyanide, ethanol, disease. They do not fight these threats by avoiding them. They fight by consuming them, absorbing them, making their bodies learn from them. And they do it to their children first," Keth added. "Their youngest, most vulnerable members receive these controlled exposures before they can walk. By the time a human child reaches the age of the girl we observed, she has already survived intentional exposure to dozens of pathogens and consumed thousands of compounds that would be classified as hazardous on our worlds. That is not a child, Vrakis. By our standards, that is a veteran." I turned away from the window. "Gorath, earlier you asked what their soldiers eat. We saw the MRE. We saw the hot sauce. But that is not the right question anymore. The right question is what their soldiers can survive." Torek Mal answered before Gorath could respond. "I looked into that as well. Their military personnel undergo training regimens that involve deliberate exposure to extreme conditions. Temperature variations, sleep deprivation, caloric restriction, psychological stress. They call it conditioning. The purpose is to push the human body to its failure points, and then allow it to recover, because each recovery cycle makes the organism more resilient. They are applying the same principle as their food and their medicine to their military training. Expose, survive, adapt. Every aspect of their civilization is built on the same strategy," Sylvesa said. "Consume the threat, survive it, grow stronger. The food, the medicine, the military training, it is all the same fundamental approach. They do not avoid danger, they eat it." Gorath unlocked his exoplates fully for the first time since the cafeteria. The sudden release of tension made a sound like cracking stone, and he stood straighter, rolling his massive shoulders. "Then I will say what we are all thinking," he said. "We came here to decide if humans are a threat. The answer is yes. They are a threat on a level we did not have a category for. But that is not the important conclusion." "What is the important conclusion?" I asked. "The important conclusion is that they do not know they are a threat. The girl offered us chocolate. The cook offered us kimchi. The commander showed us their kitchen before their weapons, because she knew the kitchen was more impressive, but she did not show it to intimidate us. She showed it to educate us. These people are not hostile. They are welcoming. They eat poison for lunch and then offer to share it with you, because they genuinely believe you might enjoy it." He clicked his mandibles in the pattern that means reluctant admiration, a sound I had heard from him exactly once before, after we watched a rival species survive a battle we thought would destroy them. "That is what makes them dangerous," Gorath continued. "Not that they are strong, that they are strong and do not realize it. A species that understands its own power can be negotiated with, contained, deterred. A species that does not understand its own power cannot be predicted, and it cannot be controlled, because it does not know what it is capable of, and therefore has no limits on what it will attempt." The room absorbed this in silence. I walked to the head of the conference table and placed both hands flat on its surface. I looked at each of my delegation members in turn. Gorath, the unstoppable; Sylvessa, the silent hunter; Torek Mal, the calculating mind; Keth, the patient frost. These were the leaders of the deadliest species in the galaxy, and I had never seen them shaken the way they were shaken now. Not by weapons, not by threats. By a child's lunch and a cook's spice rack. "I need to ask Alara one more question before I make my recommendation to the coalition," I said. "After that, we vote." I opened the conference room door and found Alara waiting in the corridor, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed. She straightened when she saw me. "War Chief, have you completed your deliberation?" "Not yet. I have one question." "Ask." "The girl, Lily, you said she is 12 years old. You said she eats like this every day. You said her mother usually packs more." I held her gaze, and I put every ounce of authority I had earned over 3 decades of warfare into my next words. "What does she want to be when she grows up?" Alara tilted her head slightly, surprised by the question. One moment. She activated a communication device on her wrist, spoke briefly with someone, and waited. A response came back within seconds. She listened, and then she looked at me with an expression that contained something I had not expected. Warmth. "She wants to be a xenobiologist," Alara said. "She wants to study alien species. She told her mother last week that she thinks aliens are, and I am quoting directly, really cute." I stared at Alara. I turned and walked back into the conference room. I closed the door. I looked at my delegation, the 5 deadliest warlords in the Deathworld coalition, beings who had collectively conquered more worlds, survived more battles, and ended more enemies than most species produce in their entire evolutionary history. "She thinks we are cute," I said. Nobody moved. "A 12-year-old organism that eats cyanide, drinks acid, sprinkles neurotoxins on her food for flavor, shares lethal methylxanthines with her friends as a social bonding ritual, and has a cellular repair system that functions as a self-improving biological army, thinks that we, the 5 deadliest beings the galaxy has ever catalogued, are cute." Sylvessa sat down. It was the first time I had ever seen her voluntarily reduce her readiness posture in an unfamiliar environment. "We cannot fight this," she said simply. "I do not mean we would lose. I mean we literally cannot fight this, because there is no framework in which fighting a species like this produces a survivable outcome. They do not have a weakness we can exploit, because they have turned every potential weakness into a strength. Their poisons are their food, their diseases are their medicine, their hardships are their training. Anything we throw at them, they will absorb, adapt to, and incorporate. That is what they do. That is what they have always done. It is their fundamental biological strategy, and it works on everything." "Agreed," Torek Mal said. Agreed, Keth said. Gorath's mandibles clicked in the pattern that means assent, the slow, heavy rhythm of a warlord accepting a truth he cannot fight. I looked at each of them one more time, then I made my decision. We are going to request an alliance, I said. Formally, through proper diplomatic channels. We are going to do it carefully, and we are going to do it respectfully, and we are going to make absolutely certain that these people understand we are approaching them as equals, not as supplicants. Because the moment they realize how much stronger they are than us, is the moment the balance of power shifts permanently. And if they refuse? Gorath asked. They will not refuse. They offered us chocolate, Gorath. They showed us their kitchen before their weapons. Their child wants to study us because she thinks we are cute. These are not the behaviors of a species that will refuse a genuine offer of partnership. They are the behaviors of a species that is waiting for the rest of the galaxy to stop being afraid of them long enough to say hello. Sylvessa straightened in her chair. There is a strategic consideration beyond sentiment, Fracas. If we ally with them, we gain access to their biochemical resilience, their medical techniques, their adaptive strategies. If we do not ally with them, someone else will, and then we face a combined force that has everything we have, plus everything they bring. The choice is not between partnership and independence. The choice is between being their friend now and being irrelevant later. I agree with the hunter, Torek Mal said. The mathematics are unambiguous. Alliance is the only position that does not lead to eventual strategic obsolescence. I looked at Keth. He had not spoken during the vote. I have one concern, he said slowly. When I arrived on this station, I expected to find a species we could evaluate, categorize, and manage according to our existing frameworks. Instead, I have found a species that breaks every framework we have. That is unsettling. But the girl, the way she offered us chocolate, the way she asked about volcanic planets with genuine curiosity, that was not a threat display. That was a child being a child, and any species whose children respond to the unknown with curiosity, instead of fear, has earned something from me that I have never given willingly to anyone outside the coalition. He paused. My trust. I opened the conference room door for the last time and stepped into the corridor where Alara was waiting. She looked at my face, read something in my expression that I thought I had hidden, and her posture changed. The patient teacher was gone. In her place stood a military officer, meeting a counterpart on equal footing, and the respect in her eyes was genuine. Commander Voss, I said, and the words came harder than any I had spoken in my career as war chief, because they required something I had not exercised in 3 decades of warfare: humility. On behalf of the Deathworld Coalition, I would like to formally request alliance negotiations with humanity. What changed your mind, War Chief? I thought about the girl, the chocolate, the cyanide fruit, the capsaicin, the fermented bacteria, the hot sauce collection, the MRE heated by demolition chemistry, the cook who ate kimchi from a jar of active bacterial cultures with his bare hands, the 12-year-old who wanted to study alien species because she thought they were adorable. Your child offered us poison and was confused when we refused, I said. We have been measuring the wrong things, Commander. Every species in the Coalition evaluates threats based on weapons, armor, environmental resistance. We measure danger by what a species can survive. But humans do not survive their environment. They absorb it. They eat it. They turn it into flavor and tradition and shared experience. And they do it so naturally that a child can do it between her morning classes without thinking twice. We are not equipped to measure that kind of strength, because we have never encountered it before. Ilara extended her hand. It was a human gesture of agreement, I had learned, a species that sealed pacts by touching each other, by making physical contact with a being they had just met, because their cellular resilience was so absolute that casual contact with an alien biochemistry did not even register as a risk. I took her hand. Her grip was warm and firm, and somewhere in the back of my mind, the war chief in me noted that the bones beneath her skin were denser than they looked. Welcome to the Alliance, War Chief, she said. I will begin the paperwork. In the meantime, would you like some coffee? It is a beverage made from roasted seeds containing a psychoactive stimulant that we consume to enhance cognitive function. You drink psychoactive stimulants. Every morning. Multiple cups. Some of us cannot function without it. We consider it essential. Our entire civilization runs on it, actually. Our scientists drink it while researching. Our engineers drink it while building. Our military commanders drink it while planning operations. I would estimate that 70% of the significant decisions made aboard this station were made under the influence of caffeine. Your leadership makes strategic decisions while consuming a psychoactive compound. While consuming a psychoactive compound that also happens to be a cardiovascular stimulant, a metabolic accelerant, and a mild diuretic. Yes, every day. Sometimes twice before lunch. I closed my eyes for a moment. Of course you do. We walked toward her office, and my delegation followed in a formation that I recognized, but had never seen directed at a human before. It was the formation we used when walking alongside a predator we had chosen to respect rather than fight. Shoulders back, eyes forward, weapons holstered but accessible. Respect without submission. Gorath fell into step beside me and spoke in a low voice. When I was young, my hatch mother told me that the universe sorts every species into two categories. Those that fear what they do not understand, and those that try to eat it. He clicked his mandibles once. I always assumed she was speaking metaphorically. She was not. No, she was describing humans. She just did not know it yet. As we passed through the mess hall one final time, I heard a voice call out from the children's section. "Hey, wait!" I turned. The girl, Lily, was running toward us with something in her hand. She skidded to a stop in front of me, looked up at my face, which was nearly 2 meters above hers, and held out a small foil-wrapped square. "I saved you one," she said, "for your trip home. It is dark chocolate, which is the best kind, but my friend says milk chocolate is better, so you might have to try both and decide for yourself." She pressed the chocolate into my hand, a lethal methylxanthine compound, wrapped in foil, offered with a smile by a small predator who had absolutely no idea she was terrifying. "Thank you," I said. Because what else do you say to a child who hands you a biological hazard and tells you it is a gift? "You are welcome. What is your name?" "Vrakis." "That is a cool name. I am Lily. I hope you come back because I have a lot of questions about volcanic planets. I read that some have rivers of actual lava, and I want to know if anything lives in them because that would be amazing." "Things live in them," I said. "I live near one." Her eyes went wide. "No way. Can you tell me about it next time? I am going to be a xenobiologist, and that would be so helpful for my project." "Next time," I said, and I was surprised to find that I meant it. She smiled once more, waved at the rest of my delegation with the enthusiastic energy that only a 12-year-old possesses, and ran back to her table, her shoes squeaking against the cafeteria floor. I looked down at the chocolate in my hand. Then I looked at my delegation. 5 Deathworld leaders, 5 species that had spent millions of years evolving to survive the harshest environments the galaxy could produce. Between us, we had conquered worlds, built empires, and earned reputations that made entire civilizations surrender rather than fight. And a little girl had just given us candy and asked us to come back so she could interview us for a school project. Gorath clicked his mandibles softly. "I like her," he said. "She offered you a lethal toxin." "I know. That is why I like her." We left the mess hall and followed Ilara to begin the formal alliance process. I held the chocolate in my closed fist the entire way, carrying it with the same care I would give a live thermal detonator, because that is essentially what it was, a small, foil-wrapped reminder that the galaxy's classification systems, our weapons, our armor, our evolutionary advantages, none of it mattered in the face of a species that had looked at every lethal compound their world could produce and found a way to enjoy it. On the shuttle back to our flagship, I sat in my command chair and placed the chocolate on the console in front of me. My officers stared at it. They had been briefed on our findings, and to them, it looked exactly like what it was, a chemical weapon disguised as a gift. I dictated my report to the Coalition Senate while we traveled. Torek Mal helped me structure it. his silicon fingers moving across the keyboard with a precision that masked the hairline fractures still visible along his forearms. The report covered everything: the cafeteria, the scanner readings, the capsaicin breeding program, the fermentation practices, the MRE heated by demolition chemistry, the hot sauce collection, the vaccination strategy, the cellular repair rates, the immune system that functioned as a self-improving internal army, the girl who ate cyanide fruit and offered chocolate to alien warlords. Torek Mal insisted on including the organ transplantation data, which he said would be the detail that convinced the skeptics. Gorath contributed a section on the kitchen's atmospheric conditions, noting that the humans cooked in an environment that met the definition of a chemical hazard zone on 4 coalition worlds, and none of them considered it remarkable. Sylvessa added a tactical assessment that was 3 sentences long: do not engage, do not provoke, befriend immediately. Keth wrote the risk analysis. It was the shortest document he had ever produced, 1 paragraph. It said that the risk of opposing humanity was total strategic collapse. The risk of ignoring humanity was eventual irrelevance. And the risk of allying with humanity was that they might offer you chocolate and you might accidentally eat it. He recommended the third option as the most survivable. But the conclusion took me longer than anything I had ever written, because I had to convey something that our language did not have adequate words for. We had words for threat, for danger, for power, for strength. We had words for enemies and allies and neutral parties, but we did not have a word for a species that was simultaneously the most dangerous thing you had ever encountered and the most welcoming. I settled on this. The first line of my report read, "Reclassify Earth immediately." The second line read, "These beings are not what our systems were designed to measure." The third line read, "And whatever you do, do not refuse their food." I sealed the report, transmitted it to Coalition Command, and looked at the chocolate one more time. Then I called Torek Mal into my office and asked him to fabricate a sealed containment case, hazardous material grade, with a bio-isolation lining and a pressure lock. He built it in 20 minutes. I placed the chocolate inside, sealed the case, and affixed a label in Coalition Standard. Diplomatic gift from humanity. Contents are biochemically lethal. Do not consume. Do not open without protective equipment. Do not underestimate the species that eats this for pleasure. I thought about adding more. I thought about writing a full explanation, a detailed account of everything the chocolate represented, the theobromine content, the metabolic pathways required to process it, the cultural significance of a species that turns lethal compounds into tokens of friendship. But I decided against it. The Senate would read my report. They would review the data. They would draw their own conclusions. What they needed to understand was simpler than any data set. A child had offered me this. A 12-year-old girl who wanted to be a xenobiologist had broken a piece of chocolate from her own supply, walked across a cafeteria, and given it to an alien warlord she had never met before, because she thought he might enjoy it. She did not know what theobromine was. She did not know that her gift would be lethal to dozens of species. She just knew that chocolate tasted good, and that sharing it was a kind thing to do. That was the detail that mattered, not the biochemistry, not the toxicology, the kindness. Because a species that is both the most biochemically dangerous organism in the galaxy and instinctively kind is a species that you either stand beside or get out of the way of. There is no third option. Below that, in smaller text, I added a personal note. A 12-year-old girl named Lily gave me this and told me to come back. I intend to. She wants to know about lava rivers. I suggest the Coalition begin preparing answers, because if we refuse her questions, she will simply find the answers herself. And based on everything I have seen, there is nothing in this galaxy that can stop a human who has decided they want to know something. I placed the containment case on the shelf above my command chair, where I keep the trophies from every campaign I have ever led. A volcanic crystal from the Siege of Kalor Ridge, a broken blade from the Battle of 3 Moons, an acid-etched plate from Gorath's world, given as a mark of respect after our first joint operation. And now, a small piece of chocolate in a hazmat container given to me by a child who eats poison for lunch and thinks the deadliest creatures in the galaxy are cute. It was, without question, the most dangerous item on my shelf. and I would not trade it for anything. The Coalition fleet jumped to lightspeed, and behind us, Earth turned slowly in the dark, blue and green and quiet, orbited by a station where a girl named Lily was probably finishing her homework and thinking about lava rivers, completely unaware that she had just reshaped the political future of 5 civilizations by eating a sandwich and sharing chocolate. The galaxy spends centuries classifying deathworlds by environmental danger, radiation levels, atmospheric pressure, gravitational force, predator density, geological instability. We measure the world. We never measure what the world creates. The most dangerous planet is not the one that kills everything on it. The most dangerous planet is the one that makes everything on it unkillable, and then teaches the survivors to enjoy it. Earth is that planet, and the proof is sitting on my shelf, wrapped in foil, waiting for someone brave enough to unwrap it. I will not be the one who tries, but I will be the one who comes back when Lily asks me to, because a species that hands you a biological weapon and calls it a treat is a species you want as a friend. Trust me, I have been a war chief for 30 years, and that little girl scared me more than any army ever has.